First Shanghai, now Beijing. The capital city of China, with more than 20 million people, faces a potential citywide lockdown as COVID cases grow. Some apartment blocks have been quarantined, some subway stations closed, and restaurants are only doing takeout now. Residents are on edge, given what they know happened in Shanghai with its extended lockdowns and people going hungry. Beijingers fear they could be next.
China is scrambling to eradicate an Omicron outbreak in Beijing. Among the weapons in the city's arsenal, mass testing. Residents are required to prove their COVID status 3 times a week. The government hopes this will allow them to detect and isolate cases immediately. For now, things appear calm, but concerns are growing. I'm worried about the situation, but I can't do anything about it. I just wonder how long it's going to go on and what the economic consequences will be. Beijing residents are still allowed to go out in many districts. But a lot of activity has been wound down, with tourist sites and other public spaces closed. Authorities are taking an incremental approach, first locking down individual buildings, then expanding the measures to whole neighbourhoods if the virus spreads. This is all in line with China's zero-COVID strategy. Many subway stations and bus routes were closed on Wednesday. In-person classes at many of Beijing's schools have also been suspended for at least a week. City authorities are keen to show that they have a handle on the situation. There are still some hidden sources of sporadic COVID-19 infections at the community level across Beijing. We need to speed up screening, tighten controls, prevent virus spillover between districts to stem the spread of the epidemic. They're also working to avoid the kind of lockdown imposed in Shanghai that has seen millions sealed in their homes, often without enough to eat, and has created negative headlines across the globe. Restrictions are easing in some parts of Shanghai as cases drop, but some fear it's only a matter of time before they explode again because of the high transmissibility of the Omicron variant.
Joining us is journalist Fabian Kretschmer in Beijing. Fabian, we know the government tried to censor what residents of Shanghai were sharing about their lockdown experiences. So I'm curious, to what extent do people in Beijing have a sense of what they might be facing?
Yeah, it depends. Actually, there's a really wide spectrum. Some residents, especially the elderly, they get their information from the state media. For example, they watch the evening news, and then they get the impression that everything is under control, and they're not really aware of the human suffering of people in Shanghai. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you have the youngish crowd who uses a VPN software. That's the device that is needed to get around the censorship here, and they follow international media. They follow social media platform with critical information, and they are very well aware of the suffering in Shanghai, and they also know that this could happen in Beijing. And most residents that I talk to, they're somewhere in between, and they know to some degree what has happened in Shanghai and what potentially also could happen here in Beijing, but they chose also not to focus too much on it. And I think that's also one way of coping with the situation. They don't want to anticipate the worst case scenario.
That's certainly a very human instinct. So overall, how on edge is everybody there?
Yeah, when the authorities first announced that Omicron was spreading here in the city, there was a lot of panic buying and a really tense situation. Also something that I have not really witnessed in the early days of the pandemic. Really, this time it felt different, more tense actually. And now that has relaxed to some degree. Why? Because we have not seen an exponential growth of the daily cases numbers. We are at roughly 50 or 60 every day, and that is rather stable. So there's no panic. And the disruptions here of daily life, because of the restrictions, they are annoying. They are also economically damaging, but they are only really an existential threat for a minority of people people. To give you an idea that here the restaurants are closed, they're only open for takeout and delivery, and we basically have to get tested, I mean really PCR tests every day, but we can still go wherever we want, and the people who are really locked down, sealed off, is so far really maybe several 100,000 maximum.
Yeah, which is a lot of people, or very little if you look at the entire population of Beijing. Do you have a sense that officials learned from their experience in Shanghai and we won't be seeing some of the more draconian measures implemented in the capital?
Well, the lesson that they drew from the situation in Shanghai is maybe different than many would assume. I mean, basically they thought that our zero COVID strategy is working, but it was not really implemented radical and swiftly enough by the authorities in Shanghai. So now what the authorities here are doing is they step in really very early. As I said, I mean, several 100,000 of people locked down in their apartments with only 60 daily cases. That is really quite early and very radical, so to speak. And I get the sense that some residents speculate that because Beijing is the political center, also the center of power, that the authorities cannot afford to also lock down this really symbolic city, and they have some trust. However, if that's justified, I think probably it will be decided in the coming weeks. I mean, definitely everyday life is not really normal, and we have to brace that it could get worse. How worse, I don't know yet.
Fabian Kretschmer, we will definitely be getting back to you on this again and again. It seems like China is intent on this zero COVID strategy. Thank you so much. The counterpoint to what's happening in China is what's happening in Taiwan. The democracy is keen to show that it will not infringe on citizen rights in the way its authoritarian neighbor has. The government has relaxed quarantine rules for overseas arrivals, even as COVID cases rise. The streets of Taiwan remain pretty normal, but there's been a renewed rush at vaccination sites as people line up to get jabbed or boosted. And as Taiwan's premier explained the government's shift, he made some pointed barbs at China's continued insistence on a zero COVID approach.
We will not lock down the country and cities as cruelly as China. We are also not like some other countries where they have no choice but to live with the virus. We move step by step, according to plan, and there's a rhythm to it.
DW's Joyce Lee has more out of Taipei.
Here in Taiwan, the Omicron outbreak started in April. This week, the number of daily cases passed 20,000 for the first time. But unlike China, the self-ruled island is moving away from the zero COVID policy. Public opinion shifted after Taiwanese people saw what happened in Shanghai. According to the latest poll, 60% of Taiwanese people now support living with COVID. Premier Su Tseng-chang said earlier this week that Taiwan will not lock down cities as cruelly as China. He also stressed that the government is taking a gradual approach to resume normal lives. Out here on the street in Taipei City, it's business as usual, but people are generally cautious. The biggest challenge is the lack of rapid test kits. The government launched a rationing system last week, but can't meet demand. Long queues are seen outside pharmacies. Some people I spoke with queue up for 45 minutes, but still left empty-handed. After coming under strong criticism, the health minister promised to make test kits more available on the island.